Hello, I'm Bob Pierce and welcome to the studio. In this video we're going to talk about cover design, some of the psychology behind it, and some of the nuts and bolts that's involved in the elements that you need to include. Now, despite the popular colloquial term, a book is never judged by its cover, that is pure D wrong. A book is always judged by its cover, and you need to have that in mind as you get into designing your own cover. Now again, as with previous videos, you may or may not do this work yourself. You may hire it out to a graphic designer, you may have the publishing company do the work, but in either case, these are things that you need to have in your toolbox to know how to ask, how to express what it is that you want and what you need. Now, the psychology of the design of a book cover, it's really not all that complicated. Now, first of all, brick-and-mortar bookstores, mostly they put the books up on a shelf and you see the spines, and that's about it. So the psychology of that is pretty straightforward. Keep the title big and bold and beautiful, and the author's name not as big but prominent enough so that people know that it's your work that they're seeing on the shelf there. Online, it's a whole other story. Online, they are going to put up a thumbnail of just the front cover, and it's going to be about that big. So you need to have something that really arrests their attention. People are going to scroll by pretty quickly. It's estimated that you have a little less than a second to get their attention and hold it long enough to get them to investigate, so that they'll read your promo material, maybe depending on where you have it listed, if there's a preview available, to take a look at that, and all of that sort of thing. So it's a really small, narrow window, and you've really got to take advantage of that as best you can. And it's hard. It's hard, but it is. Once you understand the philosophy behind it, you'll see it really kind of makes a lot of sense. There are cover designs and there are cover designs. Some of them are more successful than others. Some are successful only because, well, they wouldn't be successful for you or me. Let's just put it that way. If you're a Tom Clancy or James Patterson, John Grisham, Stephen King, yada, 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 you are going to trade on your name. And as you can see, the biggest thing on this cover is Tom Clancy, because people are looking for Tom's books. The title is big, but not huge. It doesn't really stand out as much as the name Tom Clancy. In fact, Tom is so famous and so popular that for his back cover, that's all he puts on it. It's a nice photograph. I mean, I don't take anything away from that, but when you're Patterson or King or in this case Clancy, you can get away with that because people are looking for you. They're not necessarily concerned about the book because they know it's going to be good, and they don't really care that much about the title. Now, when it comes to self-published or independent published authors, Joel C. Rosenberg is one of the most successful and one of my favorite authors. I love his dramas. And this cover design, however, if I were to give Joel some advice, I'd say, nah, it's okay. I mean, it's good. It's clever. Somebody did some really good work in Photoshop to make this work the way it does. It's a really good image, and it's done really well, but it doesn't have that grab that you need online. Joel is not as big as a James Patterson, but he has a pretty strong, pretty broad following, so people are looking for his books. So he can kind of get away with this, and probably more so now than when this particular book came out. The most powerful thing that you could put on the cover of your book to capture someone's attention is a face. And this particular book has a pretty strong image on it. It's a face, although it's not looking at the potential buyer of the book. It is a good face, attractive woman dressed in something appropriate that tells the story. The image blends into this image of the desert across the bottom here. Some really good Photoshop work there. As a matter of fact, when we get into the actual design of it, you'll see in this particular book that wraps all the way around to the back cover. So that somebody took that into account and really worked that in Photoshop. So anyway, she's not looking directly at the person who might be looking at her on the screen or in a bookstore, if it should be displayed in a bookstore. But it is a face, and people will relate to a face, and that's what makes that particular cover very powerful. Now, this is a very powerful cover. The image is a large, full face of the model on the cover, looking in the direction of the person who might potentially buy the book. Now, our eyes are turned away, but the eyes are very penetrating and looking straight at the person who would be, scrolling through on Amazon. Very, very powerful image. So that's the nuts and bolts of the psychology of it. The best way to get somebody to pay attention to your book, especially when they're scrolling through about 1 million others, is if your book looks right back at them. They will stop, they will look, they will be arrested, their attention will be arrested, at least for a moment. And that may be enough, and that may be all you need to get them to pursue a little further, looking at your promotional material, looking for the various little bits about the author, that sort of thing, and then most importantly, clicking buy me. Now, another little bit of psychology about cover design that you want to keep in mind is that people will not read your cover. Again, looking at the Tom Clancy book that I just showed you a moment ago, has a lengthy title to it. You have to actually take a moment to read it to get the whole thing. People see words, they don't read them. And when it comes to advertising, when it comes to your book title especially, that's something you need to keep in mind when you're trying to decide what are you going to call this thing. Now, I've seen some books that have really stupid sounding titles, I'll be honest with you. The titles don't seem to have any relevance to the book, but they catch the attention and they draw in the readers. Now, I try to be a little more relevant with my titles. I like to let people know at least a little bit what they're getting themselves into before they actually push that buy button. But in the meantime, we need to kind of get across something that's going to catch their attention. The image grabs them first, the words get them next, and together you have about a second to get their attention. So it's important that they see the word, not just have to read it. So in most cases, I'll try and keep it down to, if possible, a single word. Pieces. What is pieces about? Well, you notice the puzzle piece in the middle. One of the lead characters in this is a young man with autism. And the puzzle piece is kind of an icon of the condition that you see in a lot of materials. In fact, the National Autism Association uses a puzzle piece as their logo. Not this particular one. We didn't steal this one. I made it up for the book. But if you have more to say, like for example, a Jack Walsh novel. Jack Walsh, my recurring character, is the main character in this book. So that has to be on there somewhere. It's small, subtitle, that's all you need. If somebody goes to, they see Mona Lisa, I mean, talk about having a celebrity on your cover. Although obviously seriously photoshopped, but still recognizable. And then the one word, it's instantly recognizable, instantly absorbed. And so that's a good cover that works really well. So keep that in mind. Keep your titles short so that people can just sort of see that word, or 2 or 3 words, no more than that. Keep it really, really short. Until you're James Patterson or one of these other guys, you can get away with just about anything. Keep this psychology in mind. Now, one of the things to bear in mind too is that you're not James Patterson or any of these other guys. Neither am I. So what we have to keep in mind is that people aren't looking for us. People are looking for this. So make your title the most prominent thing on the cover. Bold enough. Hopefully with any luck, you'll start developing a following and people will be looking for your name. Or if they see a book cover, face, a title, and so forth, and then see your name underneath and think, oh yeah, I read one of his, or I heard so-and-so read one of his books, and I'm going to buy this one because I think it might be good. So that's something you want to keep a certain scale in mind while you're doing that. But do keep it large enough so that when this tiny little icon shows up, this little thumbnail, and it really is about the size of your thumb on the screen, and I'm sure you've seen them, you still need to be able to read it. So keep the scale proportional, but don't be so humble that you end up shrinking your name out of legibility online. Now, to find images that you can use on a front cover, stressing that faces and eye contact are the most important and most powerful things that you can have on a front cover of your book. We'll talk in another video about various places you can get them, various sources from different places you can get them without running afoul of copyright issues. And that's a quagmire you want to avoid, and tell you how to get around all of that. And also too about doing photo shoots with live models, as we did for Lilith for the front cover and for this back cover image as well, and some of the illustrations we used inside the book. Now, the back cover has certain elements on it that some are necessary, some are required, as a matter of fact. Some are optional, some are just things that I always include. I always have a background image that I put on the back cover, an overall photograph that I then lay everything over. Sometimes it's a little more ambitious than other times. When we shot the live model for the cover and other illustrations inside, we did the back cover as well. There's a rather strange story about this particular photograph, but when we get to that sort of thing, this is the reason why you want to let your photographer have a certain amount of creative freedom to be able to pull off something like this. And otherwise this shot never would have happened. Now, laid over this background photograph is a shaded box that has the promotional blurb on it. Every back cover that I do has a promotional blurb of some sort. Some are longer than others. This one's relatively short and happens to be a quote by Jack Walsh, one of the main characters in the story. It is a Jack Walsh novel, after all. In this corner here, you want to include, basically it's for use of brick-and-mortar bookstores for their inventory, the title of the book, and the name of the author. Doesn't have to be particularly large. It's just to help them in keeping their ducks aligned in their inventory. This white box is mandatory, and if you don't put it on there, the publisher will block out whatever's in that corner with a big white box to put the UPC barcodes on, and that's imperative. They use it for inventorying at the printer, and brick-and-mortar bookstores use it to inventory as well, and so do any bookstores online. Now, even though they're digital and they're online, they're selling physical books, so they need to keep track of what they have in inventory, and then of course process them for the sales. So they need the barcodes, the UPC codes. Now with Kindle and the sources that I use, they will provide that for free. It reflects off of your ISBN number, and it'll just drop in there when you upload your stuff, so you don't have to worry about any of that. Above that, the category of your book. In most cases, brick and mortar stores, if you ever walk through like a Borders or any of the other, well, even the little local neighborhood bookstores, you'll see that it's separated out by categories. You have the fiction section, the nonfiction section, the reference section, the religious section, so on and so forth. You need to tell them where your book belongs, and that's where you do it. Now, when you go through the process of registering your book with the publisher in Kindle, there is a process where you select fiction, then what kind of fiction, and any subcategories, and whatever you come up with, that's what's going to show up on the website in their listing, and that's what you want to include on the back of the book as well. If you have a publishing entity of some sort, I use Bob's Awesome Books. That's the name of the website. That's the name of everything that I do that has anything to do with the books. The logo appears on the book. This is the old logo that appeared on the first 10 books or so. The new logo is kind of vertical, so that kind of appears over here on the newer books. But also too, this was the last book that was published with CreateSpace. The positioning of this white box has moved now that CreateSpace has been taken over by Kindle. Their system puts the box a little lower on the page, so you can't put anything really under it anymore. So something I didn't know when the book came out, the last one, the one that came after this, and my logo got stepped on. It's all right, live and learn. Yeah, it's not a big deal, but I like things to look neat. So that's the bits and pieces, the various elements that go onto the back cover. So when you put together the file for printing the cover, just like the interior pages, you need to provide a PDF file. This one will be in color, of course. The interior pages, of course, color is an option, but then you have to pay for color for all 400 pages or whatever it is. You can't just pick it out here and there. So generally, my books are all black and white on the interior. Exterior is in color, and you know, that's just presumed as you go through the process. I use InDesign to do the final layout, just like I do for the interior of the book. Being an Adobe product, it's really easy to make that PDF file just like that. But these various elements have to be prepared in advance. A big photograph staged for the back here. Picture I shot myself. This is a photograph that I took at a Civil War reenactment camp out. A couple of soldiers there. Hard to see them in the background, but because the title is as large as it is, they're still pretty visible. There's a face right here that's going to be pretty prominent in it, and you can see the hat of this other guy over here, and get the sense of what's going on. He's wearing one of those Civil War kepi caps. So in this particular color configuration and the pattern that I applied to it in Photoshop, kind of hard to tell whether they're Confederate or Union, which is kind of the idea. The title is big. I used a font that gives it a little bit of style, which helps to make it visible and readable. Again, people see words before they read them. And so the first couple of words here, soldiers and statesmen, that's what people are going to see when they flip by this in the internet. Then they'll have pause to see the other words because it's big and then narrow. And my name a little smaller, and the little gold bar that kind of gives some indication of what the story's about. Now, the file includes the front page, the back page, and the spine. The width of the spine is determined by how many pages you have in your finished book. When I lay out a book cover, which I usually do about midway through the process of writing it, I lay out the front cover, I lay out the back cover, and you notice how the cover artwork wraps around the spine. It's actually a little longer than it needs to be. So I kind of set that off to the side because I don't know how wide the spine's going to be until the book is all laid out and I'm done. Then there's a formula that they provide from Kindle. Well, you figure out how many pages you have, which should be an even page because each piece of paper has two sides. So page one's on one side, page two's on the other side, and so on through the book. So you have 300 pages, you have 150 sheets of paper. Then you're going to take the number of pages, multiply it by whatever the factor is that they give you in the formula, and you have two different paper options. You have an off-white and you have a bright white. The off-white's just a wee bit thicker than the white. So depending on which one you choose, the formula is just slightly different. Multiply that out, and that'll give you the width of the spine, how wide it has to be. One of the things that I do, because this formula does not include the thickness of the cardstock that they're going to run the covers on, I bump it up a couple of hundredths of an inch just to make this just a little bit wider so that when it wraps around the butt end of the text, it has just a little bit extra so that this edge, for example, doesn't creep around to the spine. One of the reasons why I do this with the front cover image is so that we don't have that creep issue from the front cover or the spine creeping over onto one or the other. That wherever that crease takes place, we're good. So just a little bit of insurance. So your file size is going to be 6 and 6 plus whatever this width is. So let's say this is a ½ an inch. So you're going to be 6, 6.5, that's 12.5 inches from trim to trim. Now your cover, as your text might also do, is going to bleed. Bleeding is a printer's term for example, you can't print to the very edge of a sheet of paper. There are physical, mechanical requirements for the printing presses to be able to pull the paper through the press. You can't actually put ink on the edge of the sheet of paper. So what they do is they print it on a little bit larger piece of paper and then trim it off. So the industry standard for a bleed is 1/8 of an inch. And you'll see up here, this dark red bar kind of ends a little short of the end there. I left it like that so I could show you what is added. 1/8 of an inch here, across here, here, and here. So it's going to be 12.5 plus 1/8 and 1/8. So the whole file size is going to be 12 3/4 by 9 1/4. 1/8 added to the top and 1/8 added at the bottom. You don't need to add anything in between here. That's just going to disappear in the wrap of the spine. So the bleed is the outside trim. What they do when they print these books is they print the text and then they trim the outside of the book once it's all assembled. What they do is they print the text pages, collate them all together into one whole package, wrap the spine around it, around the base of it, so it's all glued together. Sometimes when a book is particularly fat, and I don't know if the light will quite catch it there, but you can see where the clamp squeezes this all together when it's glued, and it's glued with a hot glue, similar to, if you're a crafty person or know somebody who is, those little hot glue guns. It's the same sort of idea. It goes on liquid, very sticky and hot, and cools very quickly. So it goes through a clamp, and as it goes through to the other end, it gets what we call a 3-knife cut or 3-knife trim. 3 knives literally meaning 1, 2, 3, and you end up with the finished book all trimmed to size. So that bleed has to be just to stick out just a little bit more. So that means too that the interior pages have to have that extension as well. This being a spread across 2 pages, very much like the idea of the cover, except not with a spine down the middle, has an extra 1/8 of an inch added on the bottom, on the top, and on the outside on each side, so that when it goes into the finished book and gets that 3-sided trim done, that little extra gets trimmed off, and you end up with a clean image that goes right to the edge of the sheet. One thing I found with Kindle is when they were CreateSpace, their terminology was a little vague, and there were issues with making sure, if you weren't a printer, I mean, if you weren't somebody who'd been in the trade forever, you might have some trouble understanding what they were talking about. But now that CreateSpace has become Kindle, Kindle has kind of cleaned up the terminology, so it's pretty straightforward. When you go to put your book together, get it registered with them and so forth, you can see exactly how you're supposed to do it. If you don't do full page images, you don't have to worry about bleed. But you do need to worry about clear space and trim space, what they call live area. Any image cannot go beyond a certain point because of the concern of it getting lopped off when it's trimmed. So you have to keep that, they call it live area. And you can see that on the templates that they have online, how far you're allowed to go without losing something. And they will flag it when you finally upload your artwork. They go through a process of checking to make sure everything's okay, and if it's not, they'll let you know, not to worry. Well, you got to go back and fix it, but other than that, so keep all of that in mind as you go through the process. And again, like everything else, as we said at the beginning, a lot of this stuff that happens now, you have to plan for at the beginning. So as you're putting illustrations together, as you're considering what you're going to do on your cover and all of that, are you going to have images that bleed? Yes or no? Then you need to set up your template accordingly in whatever program you use to lay out your pages. Are you going to use a cover image that's going to have some sort of challenge or other? You need to make sure that you have, like if you're going to wrap the cover around like I do onto the spine, or like that other author did, going all the way around the front, spine, and back covers, you need to prepare a piece of artwork that's big enough to do that. And that's all stuff that takes time to prepare and to build. So you need to make sure you plan all of this well in advance. And so there are the nuts and bolts of what you'll need in your toolbox to get your finished work prepared for print. Whatever publishing, self-publishing operation you use, some of these things are pretty universal. Some of them you may have to do a little differently because of different requirements, but you check that out with whatever company that you're going to use, and just take from this what you need and fill in the blanks with whatever else you have to. We'll talk in future videos about faces, where to get faces for your front cover, how to go about avoiding copyright issues and all of that sort of thing, and how to work with live models. So those videos coming up next, two-part series on those. And basically, don't be afraid to get in touch with me. My contact information is in the card at the end of this whole thing with the email address. Drop me a line. I'll try to answer whatever questions you have, particularly if they relate to writing and publishing books. And in the meantime, I'm Bob Pierce. Till then, from the studio.